On Thursday of next week, voters will go to the polls in the Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse Holyrood by-election. It'll be the biggest test of Scottish public opinion since last summer's Westminster Election. The ballot follows the death of the MSP and Government Minister Christina McKelvie. At the 2021 poll, she held onto the seat for the SNP with a majority of 4,500 over Labour. We assessed the current contest with STV's political editor Colin Mackay and the polling and research analyst Mark Diffley. Mark, what sort of shape are the parties in going into this by-election?
Well, it looks pretty interesting at the moment, John. Things have changed quite a lot in the last 6 to 9 months. The SNP is probably feeling most bullish, both about the by-election and the bigger picture in terms of the Holyrood election next year. The SNP is polling on average in the national polls at around 36%, which, while significantly lower than what they achieved at the 2021 Holyrood election, where they got about 48% of the vote, represents somewhat of a recovery from the 30% they got at the general election last year. And then moving in the opposite direction, Labour, which did really well at the general election, obviously, last year, returned 37 MPs from Scotland, has hit somewhat of the doldrums in the last few months and is polling now at around 20% nationally. The big game changers, of course, are Reform, who are now polling on average, if we take a polling average, at around 16%, which will come next year, if things stay the same, give them a significant amount of representation in the Holyrood chamber. For the Tories, their vote has gone down to, on average, now about 13-14%, so about half of where they were at the last Holyrood election. So in terms of the main parties, that's what we're seeing. Positive for the SNP and Reform, less so for Labour and the Conservatives.
And what about the wider significance of this by-election, Mark?
Well, I think part of this is about timing. We've just ticked past the year to go till until the big one, the Holyrood national election next week. So this is a kind of rare Holyrood by-election, which gives us a real flavour of how the parties are shaping up. And of course, Hamilton, Central Belt seat. This is exactly the type of seat which will be pivotal to the outcome next year. So a real test in a kind of key heartland seat in the Central Belt, an urban Central Belt seat. So it will tell us a lot about the state of play. And I think finally for the parties themselves, an opportunity to start getting the messages out there, what will play well come next year, what won't play so well next year. And it will give them a real sense of where things stand as we get into the real nitty-gritty of the campaign next year.
And Colin, the contest has turned quite nasty.
Yeah, there's a big row, or a big-ish row certainly, about a Reform online advert attacking an Sarwar. It accuses him of saying that he would prioritise the Pakistani community in a speech that he made in 2022, although he didn't actually use those specific words. Labour and the SNP have complained to Meta, which is where they saw the advert. They're complaining that they're accusing Reform of racism. And today, Nigel Farage played the ad at his big press conference launch in London, and he accused Anas Sarwar of introducing sectarianism into the by-election campaign. Now, maybe these allegations of sectarianism are not quite the ones that many people might have expected from a Lanarkshire by-election, but Reform are basically setting themselves up as them against the rest in this campaign.
And Colin, you were in the constituency last week. What was the mood among the voters?
I spoke to a lot of voters. Now, I'm not pretending that it's a scientific sample. It's not something that Mark would recognise. I spoke to some SNP voters. Some of them couldn't quite tell me why they were voting SNP. Maybe it was just because they supported independence, but quite a few of them were. I spoke to a few Labour voters, although some of them aren't happy with the performance of the Labour government at Westminster. And I spoke to a couple of Reform voters. Now, in the past, they might have been a bit more reticent. This time, they were very much upfront about it, very pro-Farage. And to be honest, if Farage does come up next week, which is what's expected, to visit the constituency, it wouldn't be like 2013 where he had to hide in a pub. I think people would be offering to buy him a drink this time. But mostly, the people I spoke to the feeling was apathy. Quite a few of them, it was even anger. A lot of the voters really feel let down.
There's nothing at all going for it. There's no town centre. As I say, there's no housing. There's just nothing here at all for youngsters, older folk, any age group.
You make it sound like Hamilton's a hard place to live.
It actually is a hard place to live.
I think it's disgraceful. They're all the same. They're all going to do wonders till they get in. They don't do anything.
It's very difficult who to believe. I mean, you know, there's a lot of them have already lied. How can you believe what they're saying now? I've had phone calls from different parties. Not had anybody out at the door. I've seen them walking about the door, but not had anybody at the door. And I know they've been round about Hamilton discussing different things they're going to offer.
So that's a sample of what some of the voters in the constituency were saying to Colin last week. But Mark, you've also been in the constituency. What have you been hearing?
Yeah, pretty similar actually to what we've just heard from those residents there. There's a real kind of scunner factor. I don't think it's unique to Hamilton. I think it's across the board at the moment. But certainly, I think the one thing I would have really taken from it is that people do not think things are working, do not think the economy is working for them, do not think local public services are working for them. The key thing is, who do they hold responsible and blame for this? And I have to say, I think that certainly from the people we were speaking to, there seems a lot of discontent with a lot of the decisions which have been made by the UK Labour government in the last year since it came into power. And this may explain to some extent why Labour's support in the polls has dropped so considerably in the last sort of 6 to 9 months. And
Colin, Scotland Tonight is planning a special by-election programme next week. What can we expect from that?
Well, we invited the SNP, Labour, the Reform Party, the Lib Dems, the Conservatives and the Greens all to come into studio, all the candidates, to debate and cross-examine each other, just as we did just over a year ago at the Rutherglen by-election. Only the SNP and Reform candidates are taking up the offer of the debate in studio on Monday night. So far, there's still time for the others to come round to that. If they don't, then we might do interviews, I would think, with the others, short interviews with the other candidates. But that kind of reticence of not being willing to debate the issues in the by-election, that's not something I've ever seen before from by-election candidates. It's pretty unusual.
OK, we shall see how things go. Colin and Mark, thank you both for joining us in Scotland Tonight. There are a total of 10 candidates standing in the Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse by-election. Polling stations will open at 7 o'clock on the morning of Thursday, the 5th of June. Let's now pick up on that contest and other stories making headlines with our Tuesday night panel. With us, the Scottish Associate Editor of the Daily Mail and Mail on Sunday, Georgia Edkins, the political commentator and broadcaster Bernard Ponsonby, and the political commentator and former SNP, MP and MSP Anne McLaughlin. Thanks all for joining us. Now, we're going to start with the Hamilton Larkhall Stonehouse by-election. And Anne, because you're very much associated with the SNP, we're going to focus here on Bernard and Georgia. So Georgia, how do you see this shaping up?
The SNP are certainly polling the highest, but I think what we have to remember is that our first past the post system is a marker of relative popularity rather than absolute popularity. If you look at Holyrood 2026, SNP were on 48%. They're, as Mark mentioned, around about 35 now. So really this is not so much, I don't think, a bellwether for the SNP and how well they're going to do at the Holyrood 2026 election, but certainly a litmus test of the rise of reform and how Labour can stave them off. There is this unionist war of attrition at the moment, and unfortunately that does seem to be going between Reform and Labour, and Tories really dropping off at the side in this particular area.
Bernard, can you see anything other than an SNP victory?
No, and I think that Mark did give the accurate overview there. There have been 7 Scottish opinion polls this year. They broadly show that the SNP are polling in the mid-30s. They're showing that Labour are actually well down. If the trend in the polls was replicated a week on Thursday, the SNP will win, Labour should come second, and Reform would come third, with the Tories possibly going all the way down to a lost deposit. But you know, A year in politics is really a very long time, because in these Labour SNP battlegrounds last year, the average swing to Labour was almost towards 20%. They only need a swing of 6% to take this. On the basis of last year's politics, this should be a shoo-in for Labour, but it won't. And because of the trend in the polls and one or two local government by-elections, including one in Clydebank the other week, where the Reform UK from a standing start got a quarter of the vote, they have momentum. And if Reform were to push Labour into third place, given where Labour were just 11 months ago, that would be an abject humiliation.